So, Wizards of the Coast just recently announced a brand new storyline for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It is called Elemental Evil, and it's apparently a revamp of the classic Temple of Elemental Evil. When I looked at the information Wizards had released for it, I noticed something. That it is set in the Forgotten Realms, which, even though the original Temple of Elemental Evil was set in the Greyhawk setting. And that got me wondering, why are all the adventures in 5th edition set in the Forgotten Realm? Starter set in the Forgotten Realm. The Tyranny of Dragons adventure, Forgotten Realms. And now Elemental Evil, Forgotten Realms. Wizards, you do know that D&D has other campaign settings, right? I mean, I think I may be a little bit biased on this because, like, Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, you know, these settings are fine, and there are individual, like, pieces of them that I like. Like, for example, like, the Neverwinter campaign setting was by far one of my favorite 4th edition books, and that's set in the Forgotten Realms. But here's the thing, with the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk and Dragonlance, they're standard, generic elves and dwarves, sword and sorcery, medieval European fantasy settings. If I'm playing D&D, that sort of setting is kind of already assumed. I don't really need a book to tell me how to run that kind of world. Now, the 5th edition Player's Handbook kind of talks about a couple different worlds. Appendix B, Gods of the Multiverse, specifically talks about the deities of 4 of the D&D campaign settings, and they are, of course, Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Eberron. So I think we can assume that, aside from the realms, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Eberron are probably going to get support with 5th edition. And of those, the only one I'm really excited to see is Eberron. Eberron kind of takes the standard fantasy setting and does something different with it. It's a world of industrialized magic. Low-level magic is extremely common in Eberron. Magic is used to power technology. There's an industry of airships, like just traveling across the world. There's a giant transcontinental magical railroad. There's an entire race in Eberron called the Warforged, who are magical robots created as weapons during a world war, and then the treaty that ended the war gave them basically citizenship. So these are these former weapons who are trying to find their place in the world. It's awesome. Eberron is actually kind of the reason I got into D&D, honestly. I was aware of Dungeons & Dragons, obviously. I had played games that were based on it. I was even familiar with a few of the books that have been based on it. But, Eberron, when I found out about it, was really what kind of got me interested in the game. This was the first D&D product I bought. This is the red box that was released at the tail end of 4th edition. It's meant to basically be a throwback to one of the old classic D&D products. I did come in the 4E era, towards the second half when they were releasing the Essentials product line, so I ended up getting the Essentials books, you know, and then after I had, you know, these sort of core books, I had the starter set, I had the Essentials books, you know, it was kind of basically the base, kind of building a basis. After that, the next books I got were the Eberron books, as you can see here. The Eberron Player's Guide and the Eberron Campaign Guide. So yeah, I'm really excited to see Eberron in 5th edition, even though it'll probably be a while, especially since they're so concerned with the Forgotten Realms right now. There are a couple other settings in D&D that sort of take a non-traditional fantasy approach. One that found recent success was Dark Sun, which is a post-apocalyptic desert world. Kind of like Conan the Barbarian meets Dune. Dark Sun was apparently an old setting that they brought back for 4th edition, and the 4E rulebooks actually apparently did really well, and had a really positive response. I don't actually have any of the Dark Sun rulebooks, though I do have a comic that's set in Dark Sun. So yeah, we might be seeing Dark Sun in 5th edition. There are also 3 settings that I think we're probably going to see pieces of in 5th edition, but they probably won't actually get settings books. I am, of course, talking about Planescape, Spelljammer, and Ravenloft. These settings are sort of multiverse settings that tie a bunch of the other D&D settings together. In Spelljammer, there's like a plane between universes of the Axor, like space, and you can travel between it using magical spaceships called Spelljammers. It's like D&D meets Star Trek, basically. Then there's Planescape, which is particularly famous for the video game Planescape Torment. The plane cosmology that's used in the 5th edition Player's Handbook is actually based on the cosmology used in Planescape. It even mentions the center of Planescape, the City of Doors. Sigil, the City of Doors, is basically a city that exists between universes, between planes, and the doors lead to all different parts of the multiverse. 4th edition didn't have a Planescape handbook, but Sigil was included in the Dungeon Master's Guide 2. Lastly, there was Ravenloft. And Ravenloft is kind of tied with Eberron as my favorite setting, because it is the gothic horror setting. Ravenloft is set in the Land of Mists, also known as the Demi-Plane of Dread. And it's ruled over by mysterious entities called the Dark Powers, who sort of have influence and sight across the entire multiverse. And sometimes, when someone does something truly awful, commits an act of ultimate darkness, the Dark Powers pull that person into the Land of Mists. And, in fact, the entire landscape around them also tends to get pulled into the Land of Mists. And it becomes a domain of dread. And the person who committed the act of ultimate darkness becomes that domain's Dark Lord. And the Dark Lords are very powerful, but they also kind of suffer from a curse, from some kind of ironic curse. The most well-known Dark Lord is Strahd. This is actually a novel about Strahd and his life. Strahd was a warlord who conquered the land of Barovia and took over its castle Ravenloft. His younger brother, Sergei, came to visit him and live with him. And Strahd sort of became jealous of Sergei. He was younger, he was more attractive, he was more charming, he was even more athletic, despite compared to his warlord brother. And sort of the final nail in the coffin was when Sergei fell in love with a beautiful woman named Tatiana. And Strahd wanted her for himself. So on the night of their wedding, Strahd made a deal with a mysterious being whom he believed to be death itself. And he became a vampire, and he killed Sergei. Afterward, he sort of confessed his feelings towards Tatiana, and horrified, she threw herself off the tower and killed herself. And then the mists rose up, and Barovia was taken into the Demi-Plane of Dread. 5th edition already has a few elements of Ravenloft. The vampire section of the Monster Manual actually contains a little sidebar dedicated to Strahd. I don't know if you can see it all that well. The reason I don't think we're going to get actual settings books for Planescape, Spelljammer, or Ravenloft is that because they are sort of the multiverse settings, they kind of work well with setting agnostic stuff. Like, 4th edition rolled in elements of each of them into its sort of core universe, and it mostly worked out that way. Like, there was enough information to sort of homebrew, to sort of like take details from different sources and put the setting together in 4th edition, and I kind of see that as what they're going to do with 5th. I mean, I would love it if they released a Ravenloft setting book for 5th edition, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I'll just wait for Eberron. That said, Wizards, please, for the love of God, start releasing stuff that's not set in the Forgotten Realms. You have so many other cool settings, and I get that the realms are your cash cow, but gonna be honest, I really don't care about them. Call me when 5e Eberron comes out.
Rate! Subscribe!